Take a drive through parts of Britain that nobody films anymore. Not the city centers with the new glass towers, not the tourist villages with the tea shops and the bunting, the other places. The ones where the high street has more closed shutters than open doors. Where the GP surgery moved out 3 years ago and nobody replaced it. Where the young people left and didn't come back, and the ones who stayed are just trying to hold on. Something is collapsing across Britain, and most people can't quite name it. But you can feel it every time you drive through a town that used to have something and now has almost nothing. And here's what most people don't realize. It isn't one thing going wrong. It's a quiet unraveling across 10 counties, each one telling the same story in a slightly different accent. According to data from the Office for National Statistics, some parts of England and Wales have seen population decline, rising unemployment, and falling household income all at the same time, in the same places, over the same decade. That combination doesn't happen by accident. It follows a pattern, and the pattern is spreading faster than anyone expected. This is about 10 British counties where that collapse is already visible, not in some theoretical future. Right now, we start at number 10. Number 10. Shropshire. Shropshire sits in the middle of England, bordered by Wales to the west, mostly rural, mostly quiet. From the outside, it looks like a postcard. Rolling hills, market towns, old stone churches. But underneath that picture, something has been pulling apart for years. The county has one of the oldest average populations in England. When a place ages faster than it regenerates, the pressure doesn't build slowly. It arrives all at once. In the budgets of councils that can't afford the social care demand, in GP practices that are already overloaded, in villages where the school closed because there weren't enough children left to fill it. Shropshire Council has publicly declared serious financial difficulty more than once in recent years. The language they use is careful. The reality is less careful. Services that communities relied on for decades are being scaled back or ended altogether. Bus routes gone, libraries reduced to a couple of days a week. Support for elderly residents stretched thin across huge rural distances. And here's what makes it worse in a rural county like this. The distance is part of the problem. If you live in Shrewsbury, you can still reach something. If you live 20 miles outside it, and you don't have a car, and the bus doesn't come anymore, you are effectively cut off. Not metaphorically. Literally. Number 9. County Durham. Margaret is 63. She worked as a school dinner lady for 26 years in a small town just outside Durham City. She's lived in the same terraced house since she was in her 30s. Her words, when asked what the area feels like now compared to when she moved in, it feels like someone turned the lights off and never came back to switch them on. That line says more than a spreadsheet can. Durham's mining communities have been declining since the pits closed in the 1980s and 90s. That part is well documented. What's less talked about is what's happened to the towns that came after that era without ever fully recovering. The replacement jobs that were promised, the regeneration funding that came and went, the high streets that tried to hold on and eventually stopped trying. The county has some of the highest rates of long-term unemployment in the north of England. Households here spend a higher proportion of their income on energy and food than the national average, at a time when both of those costs have risen sharply. A household that was just managing is now not managing, and the safety net beneath them is thinner than it has ever been. If you drop your town in the comments, you'll start to see how many places share some version of this story. Number 8. Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire is one of those counties that most people in the south of England couldn't point to on a map without hesitating. That invisibility is part of the problem. It's a large county, mostly flat, mostly agricultural, with a handful of market towns and one city, Lincoln, that draws most of the attention and most of the investment. Outside that city, the picture changes quickly. Towns like Skegness and Mablethorpe sit on the coast, seasonally busy but economically fragile in a way that seasonal tourism always produces. The jobs are low wage and temporary. The housing is cheap because nobody particularly wants to move there permanently. And because housing is cheap, the area attracts people who are already struggling, which creates a concentration of deprivation that the local council is not equipped or funded to address. According to figures from local authority reports, Lincolnshire has persistent gaps in educational attainment compared to the national average, fewer people going into higher education, and lower lifetime earnings as a result. That cycle doesn't fix itself. It compounds. Number 7. Stoke-on-Trent. Stoke is technically a city, but its identity is really a collection of 6 towns that were merged into one administrative unit a century ago and have never quite felt like a single place. What they do share is a history of industry and a present of decline. The potteries that made this area famous are largely gone. The manufacturing base shrank over decades. What came in to replace it was a mix of warehousing, distribution, and retail, mostly low wage, mostly insecure, mostly the kind of work that doesn't let you save anything or plan anything beyond next month. Stoke consistently ranks in the top 10 most deprived areas in England on the indices of multiple deprivation. Life expectancy here is lower than the national average. The gap between Stoke and more prosperous parts of the Midlands has not closed. In some measures, it has widened. To be fair, this isn't the only cause, and it would be wrong to suggest that nothing has been invested here. Regeneration programs have come through, some new businesses have opened. The city center has seen some development, but investment that doesn't reach the people who are already most stretched doesn't solve the underlying problem. It creates a city of 2 speeds, and the slower speed gets slower. A like helps more people find it, takes 1 second. Number 6. Blackpool and Lancashire. Blackpool is the sharp end of what happens when a place builds its entire economy around something, and that something slowly stops working. The tourism that built Blackpool spent decades contracting. People stopped coming for a week and started going abroad instead. The boarding houses became bedsits. The bedsits became temporary accommodation. The temporary accommodation became a concentrated hub for people placed there by councils from across the north who needed somewhere cheap to house people with nowhere else to go. Blackpool now has some of the worst health outcomes in England. Drug-related deaths, alcohol-related hospital admissions, mental health crisis waiting lists that stretch further than anywhere nearby. These are not abstract statistics. They are the mathematical result of what happens when poverty concentrates in one place for long enough. The surrounding parts of Lancashire tell a quieter version of the same story. Former mill towns where the mills are now flats or car parks or empty shells. Communities that had a purpose and then lost it, and were never quite given another one. Number 5. The South Wales Valleys. Cross the Severn Bridge and head north into the valleys, and you are in some of the most scenically dramatic landscape in Britain. You are also in some of its most economically fragile communities. The coal industry that built these valleys is gone. The steel industry that supported parts of South Wales has contracted severely. What's left is a patchwork of public sector employment, small businesses, and households held together by universal credit, disability benefits, and whatever part-time work is available. The Welsh government has different structures and different funding mechanisms than England, but the underlying economic reality is similar. Areas that built their identity around industry are living in the long aftermath of that industry's disappearance, and the recovery has been incomplete and uneven. Out-of-pocket costs for commuting from valley towns to Cardiff, where most of the new jobs are, can run to hundreds of pounds a month. For someone on a low wage, that arithmetic simply doesn't work. You either stay and find less, or you leave. And the ones who leave are usually the ones with the most energy and ambition, which makes the problem worse for everyone who stays. Number 4. Hull and East Yorkshire. Hull is a city that has been trying hard. It was the UK City of Culture in 2017, which brought attention and some investment and a genuine sense of local pride, and that mattered. But cultural investment and economic recovery are not the same thing. And here's what most people don't realize. The things that make a city livable in the long run are not art installations and renovated waterfront buildings. They're whether people can find secure work, afford their rent, heat their homes, and give their children a reasonable start. On those measures, Hull and the surrounding East Yorkshire area continue to face serious structural challenges. Wages are below the national average. The cost of living has risen at the same rate as everywhere else, which means the gap between income and outgoings has widened. Households here have less room to absorb a shock, and shocks have been arriving at a rate that would challenge even comfortable households. The surrounding rural and coastal communities of East Yorkshire have less visibility but similar pressures. Declining town centres, limited public transport, healthcare services stretched over wide areas. This isn't happening in some distant place. It's happening across Britain right now. Number 3. Rural Kent and the coastal fringe. Kent is where this starts to challenge the assumptions people bring from the outside. Because when people think of Kent, they think of commuter villages, London, money, the Garden of England. And that version of Kent exists, but it exists alongside a different Kent that barely gets mentioned. The coastal towns. Thanet, Margate before the art scene arrived and after it failed to lift the people already living there. Folkestone, Ramsgate, Dover. These are towns where the gap between a working life and a stable home has become a chasm. Property values in coastal Kent are not low. They've been pulled up by second home buyers and city workers looking for somewhere cheaper to live while they work remotely. That pushed rents beyond what local wages support. A care worker, a delivery driver, someone working in a local shop cannot afford to rent a 2-bedroom flat in the town they grew up in. That is now a fact, not an exaggeration. In parts of Thanet, child poverty rates are among the highest in the south of England. That sits 3 hours from central London. The proximity makes it more startling, not less. Number 2. Greater Manchester's outer boroughs. Manchester gets celebrated, and rightly so in some respects. The city centre has genuinely transformed. Inward investment has come. New towers, new offices, new restaurants, a new sense of what the city can be. But Manchester is not just the city centre. It's Rochdale and Oldham and Wigan and parts of Salford and Bolton that didn't get the glass towers or the investment. And this is where the collapse is quieter and in some ways harder to address, because it sits in the shadow of apparent success. When the headline story is that Manchester is booming, the people in the outer boroughs who are not booming feel invisible. They feel it. You already know it if you've lived it. The Office for National Statistics has consistently recorded significant deprivation in parts of Greater Manchester's outer areas. Employment here often means 0-hours contracts and temporary work. The high streets that used to anchor these communities have been hit by the same forces hitting high streets everywhere: online retail, rising rents, business rates. But the recovery has been concentrated inward, toward the center, not outward, toward the boroughs that needed it most. Drop the name of your town in the comments. It matters to hear it. Number 1. Coastal Northumberland and the post-industrial Northeast. This is the number 1 on this list, not because it is the worst in every single measure, but because it represents the most complete version of everything that is happening across the other 9 places. Rural isolation, post-industrial collapse, an aging population, low wages, disappearing services, and a distance from political attention that makes it structurally unlikely to change soon. The stretch of Northumberland from the post-pit communities inland to the coastal villages facing the North Sea contains some of the most genuinely isolated communities in England. These are not places where you can fall back on the city if things go wrong. The city is not nearby. The infrastructure between where you are and anywhere else has been thinned to almost nothing. Healthcare here is delivered over distances that would be unremarkable in rural France or Germany, but feel extreme in a country the size of England. GP surgeries have closed or merged. Dental practices are not accepting NHS patients. The waiting times for mental health support are longer than almost anywhere in England, measured in months and sometimes years. The housing looks affordable on a price comparison website, and it is affordable in the sense that you can buy a house. The problem is that the wages in the area don't support the life that goes with the house. And the young people who grow up there know it. So they leave. And the population gets older, and the demand for services rises. And the funding per head stays flat or falls. That is not bad luck. That is a predictable outcome of specific choices that were made over decades. Choices about where investment went and where it didn't. About which places were deemed viable and which weren't. The system didn't fail these places by accident. It produced this result through accumulated decisions, and nobody was ever really held to account for them. Now, To be honest about the limits of a list like this one, there are towns in every one of these counties doing genuinely remarkable things. Community groups holding things together, businesses that stayed when they could have left, people who chose to rebuild rather than relocate. That is real, and it would be wrong to pretend the picture is uniformly dark everywhere. The decline is real. So is the resilience. Both things are true at the same time. But resilience doesn't fix structural underfunding. It delays the consequences, and the consequences are arriving faster than the resilience can absorb them. What runs through all 10 of these places is the same invisible thread. A Britain that promised its working people that if they grafted, if they paid in, if they stayed, something would be there for them and for their children. And in too many of these counties, that promise has quietly been broken, not with a headline or an announcement, just with a gradual withdrawal that happened so slowly that by the time people noticed, it was already far along. You feel it when your council raises the council tax again and removes another service. You feel it when the bus timetable changes and the stop near your house disappears. You feel it when your grandchildren tell you they're looking at renting somewhere 200 miles away because they can't afford anywhere near home. You feel it. And this isn't happening in some distant place. It's happening across Britain right now. The question worth sitting with isn't which county made the list. It's this: where do you live, and how much of this feels like your street?